Mr. Ang Wei Neng?
Question 4, sir.
Perhaps, Mr. Ang, if you give way, I will call PQ number 5.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Louis Chua?
Question 5, please.
In a resource and carbon constrained world, recycling enables us to reduce emissions and achieve a circular economy. Under the Zero Waste Master Plan, we have set a target to achieve a national recycling rate of 70% by 2030, which is supported by targets to increase the domestic recycling rate to 30% by 2030 and the non-domestic recycling rate to 81% by 2030. We are focusing on 3 priority waste streams, namely packaging waste, including plastic, e-waste, and food waste. Plastics are generated in large quantities, but the recycling rate is low. We have various initiatives to drive plastics recycling on both the domestic and industrial fronts. The National Recycling Program caters to residential premises, while the mandatory packaging reporting scheme encourages companies to reduce the amount of packaging they use. Under this scheme, large producers of packaged products and retailers must report the amount of packaging they introduce into Singapore annually and develop 3R or reduce, reuse, and recycle plans for packaging materials, including plastics. Members of the public will have more opportunities to contribute to plastics recycling under the upcoming beverage container return scheme, which will encourage the return and recycling of beverage containers such as plastic bottles. This scheme is expected to be in place by mid-2024 and will help cultivate recycling habits amongst the community and enable us to aggregate clean and high-quality recyclables. Similar schemes in countries such as Norway, Sweden, and Lithuania have achieved return rates of 80% or higher. Agencies are also exploring innovative solutions with the private sector that will allow us to recycle more plastics. One such initiative is chemical recycling, which can process plastics that cannot be mechanically recycled, such as contaminated single-use plastics, and convert these into feedstock to manufacture new products like plastics, chemicals, and even sustainable aviation fuels. We will need everyone's collective efforts to reduce, reuse, and recycle in order to achieve our national recycling rate target.
Mr. Louis Chua?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Just want to ask you for the SMS. I'm not sure I caught the answer to the question in the original PQ in terms of the target.
Mr. Chua, I could invite you to speak up, please, or speak into the mic.
Sure.
Thank you.
Specific to the original PQ that I asked on the recycling rates by category, I asked that because if you look at plastics, for example, it's only about 6%, whereas for categories such as ferrous metal is really at 99%. So in terms of getting to the 2030 target recycling rate, what would be the breakdown for some of these targets, and specifically for plastics, given that there have been studies which indicate that it's technically feasible to undertake chemical recycling here in Singapore, whether or not what are the plans around this in terms of implementation? Thank you.
SMS Amy Khor?
Well, first I must clarify that I am answering your question because there's only one question. There's no amended question. Now, my reply is firstly that under our Zero Waste Master Plan, we have an overall recycling rate of 70%, and this is accompanied by a domestic recycling target rate of 30% and non-domestic target recycling rate of 81%. So you are right to say that in the case of certain waste streams, like ferrous metals or construction and demolition waste, for instance, we have successfully achieved close to 100% recycling rate. We are, as I've noted earlier, focusing on three priority waste streams, which are the packaging waste that includes plastic, e-waste, as well as food waste, because these are generated in large volumes, and we expect these volumes to likely increase. For instance, electrical and electronic waste. So we are focusing and targeting on this. They are large volumes, but the recycling rate, as you have also rightly pointed out, is low. And we do track and publish these recycling rates. But we also recognize that really for certain waste streams, they are interconnected. So for instance, if we implement or when we implement the beverage container return scheme, which will cover plastic bottles as well as metal cans, the recycling rate for these containers, used beverage containers, will increase and is likely to reduce the contamination rate in our blue recycling bins or the recycling chutes, which means that the recycling rates for the other waste streams in the recycling bins and recycling chutes would increase. And that's why we think that by having an overall recycling rate target, it provides us with a streamlined approach to track the progress we are making in terms of achieving our vision of a zero waste nation. Now, notwithstanding that, even though we don't have specific targets for certain waste streams, actually when we implement initiatives to drive the recycling rates for various waste streams, for instance, e-waste, we actually do set targets under the Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme. So for e-waste, for instance, there is a collection target of 60% for large household appliances and 20% for the rest of the covered products. Similarly, for the beverage container return scheme, in countries, as I've said, that have implemented it, they have achieved collection or return rates of 80% and above, and we are currently consulting the relevant stakeholders to determine the targets, return rates that we will set for the BCRS. And when we implement an EPR for packaging waste, which we are planning to do, we will also similarly set targets for this.
No further SQs. We move on.